The words hit me like a slap across the face as I stood in my own kitchen, holding the perfectly golden turkey I'd been basting for the past 4 hours. Honestly, Margaret, you're becoming more useless every year. Maybe it's time you stepped aside and let someone who actually knows what they're doing handle the holidays. My daughter-in-law Jessica's voice dripped with condescension as she surveyed my Thanksgiving preparations with obvious disdain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Margaret Whitmore, 72 years old, and until that moment, I thought I knew my place in this family. For 47 years, I'd hosted every major holiday in this house. I'd raised 3 children here, buried my beloved husband Robert 2 years ago, and somehow managed to keep the family traditions alive, despite the gaping hole his absence had left in all our lives. The massive colonial home in Westfield had been our sanctuary, our gathering place, the heart of the Whitmore family legacy. But standing there on Thanksgiving morning, watching Jessica rearrange my carefully set dining room table while my son Daniel nodded along like a bobblehead, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't my home anymore, at least not in their eyes. I'd become an inconvenience, a relic from a bygone era, who was too stubborn to gracefully fade into the background. Jessica had married Daniel 8 years ago, and I'd tried so hard to welcome her into our family. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to make my son happy, which was all I'd ever wanted for him. Fresh out of law school, with big dreams and an even bigger personality, she'd swept Daniel off his feet during his messy divorce from his first wife. I'd supported their relationship, helped plan their wedding, and bit my tongue countless times when she made little comments about updating family traditions or modernizing our holiday celebrations. The kitchen that morning was a war zone of competing visions. Jessica had arrived at 7 a.m. with her own turkey, her own side dishes, and her own very firm opinions about how Thanksgiving should be conducted. She'd immediately begun criticizing everything from my china pattern to my choice of wine, suggesting that perhaps it was time for fresh blood to take over the family hosting duties. "Mom, Margaret," she said, using the patronizing tone she'd adopted over the past few years, "why don't you go sit down and let me handle this? You look tired, and we don't want you to overexert yourself." The way she said it made it sound like I was 1 foot in the grave instead of a perfectly capable woman who'd been cooking holiday meals since before she was born. My younger son Christopher and his wife Anna had arrived an hour earlier with their twin daughters, and I'd watched Jessica immediately commandeer them, ushering them away from my kitchen and into the living room where she'd set up what she called a proper appetizer spread. Anna had glanced at me apologetically, but Christopher seemed oblivious to the subtle power struggle taking place in his childhood home. The final straw came when Jessica opened my refrigerator and began removing dishes I'd spent days preparing. "We really can't serve this cranberry sauce," she announced, holding up the crystal bowl that had belonged to my mother. "It's clearly from a can. I brought a proper homemade version with organic cranberries and locally sourced honey." Something inside me snapped. "Jessica, that cranberry sauce has been made from the same family recipe for 3 generations. My grandmother taught my mother taught me, and I taught Daniel's first wife. It's never been from a can." She paused, the bowl still in her hands, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Not embarrassment or apology, but calculation. "Well," she said slowly, "perhaps it's time for new traditions. After all, this house is going to be ours soon enough." The words hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Daniel, who'd been arranging football viewing schedules with his brother, suddenly went very quiet. Christopher stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Anna. Even the twins seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and moved closer to their mother. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica set down the cranberry sauce and turned to face me fully, her expression transforming from fake sweetness to something much more honest and infinitely colder. "Oh, come on, Margaret. We all know you can't keep rattling around in this big house forever. Daniel and I have been looking at the real estate market, and homes like this are going for well over $2 million in the current market. You're sitting on a gold mine while living like you're barely scraping by." I felt the blood drain from my face. "This is my home, Jessica. Robert and I built our life here. Our children grew up here. And now those children are adults with their own families and their own financial needs," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her theme. "Daniel's been too polite to bring it up, but we're drowning in student loan debt from law school, and we want to start a family. Christopher and Anna could use help with the twins' college funds. It's selfish to hold on to all this wealth when your family is struggling." I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to contradict his wife, to defend me, to show some spine. Instead, he was staring at his shoes like a chastened schoolboy. "Daniel?" I said, and the word came out like a plea. He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. Guilt, yes, but also a kind of resigned determination. "Mom, Jessica's not wrong about the financial pressures we're facing, and this house is a lot for you to maintain on your own. Maybe it would be better if—" "If what?" I interrupted. "If I sold my home so you and your wife could pay off your debts? If I gave up everything your father and I worked for so you could have an easier life?" "It's not about easier," Jessica jumped in. "It's about being practical. You're getting older, Margaret. What happens when you can't manage the stairs anymore? What happens when you need medical care? Wouldn't it make more sense to sell now while the market is good and move into a nice senior community?" The conversation continued around me, but I'd stopped listening. Instead, I was remembering the morning 2 years ago, when Robert had his heart attack in our bedroom upstairs. I was remembering how Daniel had held my hand at the funeral and promised that nothing would change, that I would always have a home with family. I was remembering Jessica's tears that day, which I'd assumed were genuine grief for the father-in-law she'd claimed to love. Now I realized those tears had probably been relief. With Robert gone, there was one less obstacle between her and what she clearly saw as her inheritance. "I need some air," I announced, walking out of my own kitchen and leaving them to their feast of my family's legacy. The back garden was Robert's pride and joy, and even in late November, it retained traces of the beauty he'd cultivated over decades. I sat on the bench we'd installed for our 40th wedding anniversary and tried to process what had just happened. My family, my own children, were actively plotting to take my home away from me. They weren't concerned about my well-being or my happiness. They saw me as an obstacle to their financial goals. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She assumed I was just a lonely old widow living on Social Security and Robert's modest pension. She had no idea about the investment portfolio Robert and I had built over our 45 years of marriage. She didn't know about the real estate holdings in 3 states, the stock options from Robert's early days with a tech startup that had exploded in value, or the life insurance policies that had left me with liquid assets most people could only dream of. Robert and I had been Depression-era babies who'd learned the value of living below our means and investing wisely, while our friends bought bigger houses and fancier.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Cars, we'd quietly built wealth and saved for the future. The modest lifestyle we maintained wasn't because we couldn't afford better, but because we'd never felt the need to show off our financial success. As I sat in Robert's garden, listening to the sound of my family discussing my future through the kitchen windows, I made a decision that would change everything. If Jessica wanted to play financial hardball, she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong opponent. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Marcus Chen, the estate attorney who'd handled Robert's will. Marcus had been trying to convince me for months to update my own estate planning, and suddenly I had very clear ideas about how I wanted my assets distributed. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "it's Margaret Whitmore. I know it's Thanksgiving, but I need to schedule an appointment as soon as possible. I want to completely revise my will, and I have some very specific instructions about how I want my estate handled." Through the kitchen window, I could see Jessica holding court at my dining room table, directing the placement of her dishes while pushing mine aside. She was wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas last year, the ones that had belonged to Robert's mother. At the time, I thought she would appreciate becoming the keeper of family heirlooms. Now I realized she probably just saw them as valuable assets. Marcus agreed to meet with me the following Monday, and I spent the rest of the call outlining my preliminary ideas. By the time I hung up, I felt calmer than I had in hours. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a plan that went beyond simply surviving each day. When I returned to the house, Thanksgiving dinner was in full swing. Jessica had indeed taken over completely, and I noticed that several of my dishes had been relegated to the kitchen counter, while hers occupied places of honor on the dining room table. She'd even switched out my china for the everyday dishes, claiming that the formal stuff was too stuffy for a family gathering. "There you are," Daniel said as I entered the dining room. "We were worried about you." "Just getting some fresh air," I replied, taking my seat at what had apparently been designated as the foot of the table. Jessica, I noticed, had positioned herself at the head, in Robert's chair. The conversation during dinner was illuminating in ways Jessica clearly hadn't intended. As the wine flowed, she became more expansive about her plans for when we inherit the house. She talked about knocking down walls to create an open-concept floor plan, replacing my beloved garden with a swimming pool, and converting Robert's study into a home gym. "Of course, we'll probably rent it out for a few years first," she confided to Anna while cutting her turkey. "The rental market in this neighborhood is incredible. We could easily get $8,000 a month, maybe more." Christopher looked uncomfortable. "Jess, maybe we shouldn't be planning Mom's estate while she's sitting right here." Jessica waved him off. "Oh, Margaret understands. Don't you, Margaret? We're not being greedy, we're being practical. This house is an investment, not a shrine." I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the agreeable old lady while mentally calculating exactly how much Jessica's legal education had cost and how dramatically I was about to increase that debt burden. After dinner, while Jessica supervised the cleanup of her kitchen, I found myself alone with the twins in the living room. 8-year-old Emma and Sophie were playing with the dollhouse that had belonged to their Aunt Sarah, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage. Sarah was spending Thanksgiving with her mother this year, but she'd specifically asked me to make sure the dollhouse stayed in the house because she wanted her future children to play with it someday. "Grandma Maggie," Emma said, looking up from the tiny furniture she was arranging, "Aunt Jessica says you're going to move to an old people's home soon. Is that true?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Why would she say that, sweetheart?" "She told Mommy that old people shouldn't live in big houses by themselves because they might fall down and no one would find them for days," Sophie chimed in with the brutal honesty of childhood. I knelt down beside the dollhouse, watching the girls play with toys that had brought joy to 3 generations of Whitmore children. "Sometimes adults say things when they're worried or scared," I said carefully. "But I'm not planning to go anywhere. This is my home, and it's your home too whenever you want to visit." Emma looked relieved, but Sophie frowned. "Aunt Jessica said when you die, Daddy gets everything, and we can have swimming parties in your backyard." The casual way she delivered this information, clearly repeating something she'd overheard, made my blood run cold. Jessica wasn't just planning to take my house, she was already explaining my death to my grandchildren like it was a foregone conclusion. That night, after everyone had gone home with containers of leftovers and promises to, quote, "talk soon about the house situation," I sat in Robert's study and began making lists. Names, phone numbers, account information, and most importantly, a detailed timeline of exactly how I was going to dismantle Jessica's comfortable assumptions about the Whitmore family fortune. The first call I made was to my financial advisor, Patricia Hendricks, who'd been managing my portfolio for 15 years. Patricia had worked late nights and weekends to help Robert and me maximize our investments, and she'd guided me through the financial transition after his death, with both professional expertise and personal compassion. "Margaret," she said, clearly surprised to hear from me on Thanksgiving evening, "is everything all right?" "Patricia, I need to make some significant changes to my financial arrangements, and I need to do it quickly. How soon can we liquidate the education funds I set up for Daniel and Christopher?" There was a pause. "Those funds are worth almost $400,000 combined. Are you sure you want to close them out? There will be tax implications." "I'm very sure. I also want to review the trusts I established for my grandchildren. Can those be modified?" "Yes, but Margaret, what's brought this on? Is there some kind of emergency?" I looked around Robert's study, at the photos of our family covering every surface. at the books he'd collected over a lifetime, at the desk where he'd planned our retirement and dreamed about watching our grandchildren grow up in this house. "You could say that," I replied. "My family has decided that I'm too old and useless to manage my own affairs. I think it's time I showed them exactly how capable I still am." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and appointments. Marcus Chen was fascinated by my plans and immediately began drafting the documents I'd requested. Patricia worked with her team to restructure my investments according to my new priorities. And I made several calls to organizations that would soon be receiving some very substantial donations. Meanwhile, Jessica had apparently decided that Thanksgiving dinner had gone so well that she should accelerate her timeline. She began calling me daily with suggestions about senior living communities and real estate agents who specialized in family transitions. She even went so far as to schedule a consultation with a moving company, claiming she was just trying to be helpful by getting estimates. The most egregious move came the following Tuesday when she showed up at my door with a realtor in tow. "Margaret," she announced, breezing past me into my foyer, "this is Sandra Kim from Premier Properties. I thought you might like to get a professional opinion on the house's market value, just for planning purposes." Sandra Kim was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but Jessica had apparently painted it as a done deal. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said hesitantly, "your daughter-in-law mentioned that you're considering selling. I'd be happy to walk through and give you a preliminary assessment." "How thoughtful of Jessica to arrange this without asking me," I said sweetly. "Please come in. I'd love to show you around my home." For the next hour, I gave Sandra the most comprehensive tour I'd ever given anyone, pointing out every renovation Robert and I had made, every piece of original architectural detail, every improvement that added value to the property. Jessica trailed behind us, clearly expecting me to be overwhelmed by talk of market values and comparative sales data. Instead, I asked detailed questions about pricing strategies, marketing approaches, and commission structures. I discussed the pros and cons of various listing strategies with the expertise of someone who'd been buying and selling investment properties for decades. Sandra, to her credit, recognized that she was dealing with a much more sophisticated client than Jessica had indicated. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sandra said as we concluded the tour in the living room, "you clearly have a beautiful home with excellent bones and outstanding maintenance. Based on recent comparable sales, I'd estimate the market value between $2.8 and $3.2 million, possibly higher depending on how we position it." Jessica's eyes lit up at the numbers, but I saw Sandra watching me carefully, clearly puzzled by the family dynamics she was witnessing. "That's very helpful information," I said. "Sandra, could I get your card? I'll definitely want to call you when I'm ready to make some real estate moves." After they left, I called Sandra directly. "I wanted to apologize for the confusion earlier. My daughter-in-law has some very strong opinions about what I should do with my property, but I want to be clear that I'm not currently planning to sell this house." "I understand," Sandra said diplomatically. "Family dynamics around real estate can be complicated." "Indeed they can, but I am interested in working with you on some other properties I own. Would you be available to discuss investment strategies for a portfolio of rental properties?" Sandra's tone shifted noticeably. "Absolutely. I'd be very interested in discussing that with you." We scheduled an appointment for the following week, and I could practically hear her reassessing everything she thought she knew about the situation. By Friday, exactly 1 week after Jessica's Thanksgiving declaration, I was ready to begin phase 2 of my plan. I called Daniel and asked him to come over that evening, alone. When he arrived, looking sheepish and uncomfortable, I was waiting for him in the living room with a manila folder and a cup of his father's favorite scotch. "Mom," he began before he'd even sat down, "I want to apologize for how things went on Thanksgiving. Jessica gets passionate about things, and sometimes she doesn't express herself well." "Passionate," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know she came on strong about the house situation, but you have to understand the pressure we're under. My student loans alone are costing us $3,000 a month, and Jessica's been out of work since her firm downsized." This was news to me. "Jessica's unemployed? Since when?" "About 6 months now. She didn't want you to know because she was embarrassed. The legal market is really competitive right now, and she's been having trouble finding a position that matches her qualifications." I absorbed this information while Daniel continued his explanation. Apparently, their financial situation was much worse than I'd realized. They were behind on their mortgage, maxed out on credit cards, and facing the possibility of defaulting on their student loans. Jessica's push for me to sell the house wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Understanding the motivation didn't excuse the approach, but it did clarify why Jessica had been so aggressive about forcing the issue. "Daniel," I said gently, "why didn't you come to me directly? Why didn't you ask for help instead of letting Jessica ambush me in my own kitchen?" He looked miserable. "Because I'm 43 years old, Mom. I should be helping you, not the other way around. Dad always said I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. Your father also said that family takes care of family," I reminded him. "But there are ways to ask for help that don't involve insulting me and planning my funeral." I opened the manila folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the education fund your father and I set up when you started law school. As of yesterday, it contained $215,000. Daniel's eyes widened. "I didn't know that existed." "Your father wanted it to be a surprise, something to help you and Christopher with your children's education or your own career development. We never touched it, even when money was tight." I handed him the document, which showed a zero balance as of that morning. "It's been closed and the funds redistributed." "Redistributed where?" "Christopher's education fund has been donated to a scholarship program for first-generation college students. Yours has been donated to a legal aid society that provides free representation for domestic violence victims." Daniel stared at the papers in shock. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm very serious. These organizations will put the money to good use helping people who truly need it, rather than enabling adults who think inheritance planning is an appropriate Thanksgiving dinner conversation." I pulled out the second set of documents. "This is information about the trust funds your father and I established for Emma and Sophie. They were worth about $150,000 each, intended to provide for college and help them get started in adult life." Daniel's face had gone very pale. "Were? Those have also been redistributed. The money will now fund college scholarships for children in foster care, kids who don't have grandparents to provide for their futures." "Mom, please. You can't do this to Emma and Sophie. They're innocent." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "They are innocent. Which is why I've established new, smaller trusts for them, funded entirely by money I've earned through my own investments since your father's death. These trusts will provide modestly for their education, but they won't make them wealthy." Daniel was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "I don't understand what's happening here." "What's happening," I said calmly, "is that I'm making sure my money goes to people who will appreciate it. Your wife made it very clear that she sees me as an obstacle to her financial goals. She's decided that I'm useless, that this house is wasted on me, and that my death will be a financial opportunity for your family. She never said. She told my granddaughters that when I die, you'll inherit everything, and they can have swimming parties in my backyard. She's already planning to rent out this house for $8,000 a month after forcing me into a nursing home. And most importantly, Daniel, you stood there and let her do it." The room was quiet except for the tick of the grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his father. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, and I could see him processing the full scope of what had just happened. "The house," he said finally. "What about the house?" I smiled. "The house will remain mine for as long as I live. After my death, it will be donated to a foundation that provides temporary housing for women and children escaping domestic violence. It will never be sold, never be rented out for swimming parties, and never provide Jessica with the windfall she's been counting on." Daniel looked up at me with something approaching panic. "Mom, our financial situation is really desperate. If you won't help us, we might lose everything." "You might," I agreed. "But that's a choice you and Jessica will have to work through together. There are bankruptcy attorneys who can help you restructure your debt. There are career counselors who can help Jessica find employment that matches her qualifications. There are financial advisors who can help you create a realistic budget and recovery plan." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Robert's garden. "What there won't be is easy money from forcing your widowed mother out of her home." "This is all because of what Jessica said on Thanksgiving?" I turned back to face him. "This is because of what Jessica said, what she's been planning, and most importantly, because you supported her. You stood in my kitchen and agreed that I should sell my home to solve your financial problems. You didn't defend me, you didn't suggest alternatives, and you didn't show me the respect I deserve as your mother and as the owner of this house. Daniel was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents that had just eliminated his family's financial safety net. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I said gently. "But sorry doesn't change what happened. And it doesn't change the choices you made. Is there anything I can do to fix this?" I considered the question seriously. "You can tell Jessica that there will be no inheritance, no house sale, and no easy solutions to your financial problems. You can stop treating me like a burden and start treating me like a person who deserves respect. And you can figure out how to solve your problems without expecting me to sacrifice my security for your comfort." After Daniel left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Robert's chair to process what I'd just done. In the span of 1 week, I'd redistributed over $500,000 and fundamentally altered my family's expectations about their financial future. It felt both liberating and terrifying. The next morning, Jessica called. Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury, and she dispensed with all pretense of politeness. "Margaret, Daniel told me about your little temper tantrum yesterday. This is exactly the kind of irrational decision-making that proves you shouldn't be handling your own affairs." "Jessica," I replied calmly, "I'm sorry Daniel shared private financial information with you, but my decisions about my assets are neither irrational nor your concern. Those education funds were meant for your family. And I've used them to help families, just not the specific families you had in mind. You can't do this to us. We're your family." "Yes," I said, "you are. And family members should treat each other with respect and consideration, not plot to take each other's homes during holiday dinners." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Jessica alternating between threats, guilt trips, and attempts at manipulation. She suggested that I was having a mental breakdown, that I needed psychiatric evaluation, and that Daniel should petition for guardianship to protect me from my own poor judgment. "Feel free to pursue that," I told her. "My attorney will be very interested in documenting your attempts to have me declared incompetent, so you can access my assets." When Jessica realized that threats weren't working, she tried a different approach. "Margaret, I'm willing to admit that I handled Thanksgiving poorly. I was stressed about our financial situation and I took it out on you. But surely we can work something out. You can't want to see your own son lose his house." "What I want," I said, "is for my family to respect me. What I want is to live in my own home without being pressured to sell it. What I want is to be treated like a person instead of a bank account with an expiration date." "But what about Daniel? What about the girls' futures? Daniel is a grown man with a law degree and professional options. The girls will be fine with modest educational support instead of inherited wealth. And you, Jessica, will need to find a job and contribute to your family's financial recovery instead of waiting for me to die." After I hung up, I called Christopher to give him a heads up about the situation. His reaction was very different from Daniel's. "Mom," he said after I'd explained everything, "I'm proud of you. You're not angry about the education funds?" "I'm angry that Daniel and Jessica put you in this position. Anna and I have been talking, and we've been really uncomfortable with some of the things Jessica's been saying about the house and your finances. We just didn't know how to address it without causing family drama. And now there's plenty of family drama," I said with a rueful laugh. "Maybe that's what was needed. Mom, Anna and I want you to know that we support whatever decisions you make about your money and your house. We never expected to inherit anything, and we don't want you to feel pressure to provide for us." The conversation with Christopher reminded me that I'd raised two very different sons. Daniel had always been more focused on status and financial success, while Christopher had chosen a career in social work that provided personal satisfaction rather than wealth. The irony wasn't lost on me that the son who'd never asked for money was the one whose education fund I'd felt most conflicted about redistributing. Over the weekend, I made one final decision. I called Patricia and asked her to set up a small, renewable grant fund that would provide modest financial assistance to Christopher and Anna for unexpected expenses or emergencies. Not enough to make them wealthy, but enough to provide security. "What about Daniel?" Patricia asked. "Daniel and Jessica will need to prove they can respect my autonomy before I consider any financial assistance." Right now, I'm not convinced that giving them money would solve their problems or improve our relationship. Monday brought the first real test of my new approach. Jessica showed up at my door unannounced with a stack of papers and a determined expression. "Margaret," she announced, "I've been researching elder law, and I think you should know that adult children have legal options when their parents make financially irresponsible decisions." I invited her in and offered her coffee, curious to see how far she was willing to push this. "I've consulted with several attorneys," she continued, "and they've told me that sudden, dramatic changes in financial behavior can be evidence of diminished capacity. The fact that you gave away over $500,000 in a matter of days could be grounds for a competency evaluation." "How interesting," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. "And what exactly would this competency evaluation involve?" Jessica pulled out her papers and began reading. "Cognitive testing, medical evaluation, review of financial decision-making capacity. If the court determines that you're not capable of managing your affairs, they can appoint a guardian to make decisions on your behalf. And I suppose you've already volunteered Daniel for that role? Daniel is your eldest son and a legal professional. He'd be the logical choice." I sipped my coffee and considered my response. "Jessica, I think there are a few things you should know before you pursue this course of action." I walked to Robert's desk and pulled out a different manila folder, one I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "First," I said, "here are the results of the comprehensive medical and cognitive evaluation I underwent last month. My physician, my neurologist, and a court-appointed psychiatrist have all certified that I'm in excellent mental health, with no signs of dementia, depression, or impaired judgment." Jessica's confident expression faltered slightly. "Second," I continued, "here's a detailed financial analysis prepared by my investment advisor, showing that my recent charitable donations represent less than 12% of my total assets. Hardly the actions of someone depleting her resources irresponsibly." I handed her a third document. "And finally, here's a statement from my attorney detailing the legal protections I've put in place to prevent exactly the kind of guardianship proceeding you're threatening. Any attempt to have me declared incompetent will be met with a vigorous legal defense and a countersuit for elder abuse and financial exploitation." Jessica stared at the papers, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like grudging respect. "You planned this," she said slowly. "I plan to protect myself from exactly what you're trying to do right now," I corrected. "Jessica, I understand that you're desperate, but what you're describing isn't legal advocacy, it's elder abuse. You're literally trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so you can access my money." "We need help," she said, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, she sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. "I know you do, and there are legitimate ways to ask for help that don't involve threatening my autonomy or plotting to take my home." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Jessica looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "Our financial situation is so bad that I wake up every night in a panic. I lost my job, Daniel's drowning in debt, and I felt like this house was our only hope." It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in months, possibly years. "Jessica," I said gently, "I'm willing to help you and Daniel develop a realistic plan for financial recovery. But that help comes with conditions. You need to treat me with respect, you need to stop pressuring me about the house, and you need to accept that my estate planning is my decision to make." "What kind of help?" "I'll pay for financial counseling and career coaching for both of you. I'll provide a modest emergency fund to prevent you from losing your house while you get back on your feet. And I'll consider providing limited, temporary assistance with critical expenses like medical bills or emergency repairs." Jessica looked hopeful for the first time in weeks. "What about the education funds you closed?" "Those are gone permanently. The money is already being used to help people who truly need it. But I'm willing to establish smaller, new funds for Emma and Sophie's futures, assuming their parents can demonstrate that they've learned to manage money responsibly." "And the house?" "The house remains mine, and my estate plans remain unchanged." "Jessica, you need to build your security on your own efforts, not on my death." After Jessica left, I realized that I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like I had control over my own life and my own choices. Jessica and Daniel might never fully forgive me for disrupting their financial plans, but they would have to respect my decisions. That evening, I called Sarah, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage. At 25, she was starting her career as a pediatric nurse and saving money to buy her first house. "Grandma Maggie," she said, clearly delighted to hear from me. "How are you? Dad told me there's been some family drama." "You could say that. Sarah, I wanted you to know that I've made some changes to my will, and I wanted to explain my reasoning." "Okay," she said cautiously. "I've established a trust fund that will help you with the down payment on your first house and provide some financial security as you start your career. Not enough to make you wealthy, but enough to give you a good foundation." "Grandma, that's incredibly generous, but you don't need to." "I want to," I interrupted. "You've never asked me for anything, never pressured me about money, and never made me feel like a burden. You remember your grandfather with love instead of seeing him as a missed opportunity for inheritance. That means everything to me." We talked for another hour about her work, her goals, and her memories of her grandfather. By the time we hung up, I knew I'd made the right decision about how to distribute my resources. The following months brought significant changes to our family dynamics. Jessica did find a new job, though it paid significantly less than her previous position. She and Daniel entered financial counseling and began the slow process of digging out of debt. They also began treating me with genuine respect rather than barely concealed impatience. Christopher and Anna continued to be supportive and loving, never asking about money or pressuring me about my plans. The twins adjusted to having a grandmother who was more involved in their lives but less focused on providing them with material advantages. The real transformation began 6 months after that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting in my newly redecorated breakfast nook, enjoying my morning coffee and reading the financial section of the newspaper, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman in a business suit holding a clipboard and looking nervous. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she said when I opened the door. "I'm Amanda Torres from the Westfield Community Foundation. I was hoping we could speak about your recent donations." I invited her in, curious about what the foundation might want to discuss. Over the past several months, my charitable giving had increased dramatically, but I'd been careful to work through established organizations with solid reputations. "Mrs. Whitmore," Amanda began once we were settled in the living room, "your donations have had an extraordinary impact on our programs. The scholarship fund you established for first-generation college students has already helped 12 young people enroll in 4-year universities. The legal aid contribution has allowed us to hire 2 additional attorneys for our domestic violence program." I smiled, feeling a warm satisfaction that my money was being put to good use. "I'm delighted to hear that." "Actually," Amanda continued, "that's why I'm here. We're hoping you might consider joining our board of directors. Your background in investment and your commitment to community service would be invaluable to our strategic planning." The invitation surprised me. Since Robert's death, I'd felt increasingly invisible, especially within my own family. The idea that strangers valued my expertise and wanted my involvement was both flattering and energizing. "Tell me more about what board service would involve," I said. Amanda spent the next hour outlining the foundation's work, from scholarship programs to emergency assistance for families in crisis. The more she talked, the more interested I became. This was exactly the kind of meaningful engagement I'd been missing since retirement. "I'd be honored to serve," I told her. "When would I start?" As Amanda was leaving, my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar tension that had become associated with any contact from Daniel's household. "Margaret?" Jessica's voice was strained. "We need to talk. Can Daniel and I come over this evening?" "Of course," I replied, though I wondered what crisis had prompted this request. They arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, both looking more serious than I'd seen them since our previous confrontation. Daniel was carrying a folder of papers, and Jessica looked like she'd been crying. "Mom," Daniel began without preamble, "we owe you an apology that goes far beyond anything we've said before." I gestured for them to sit down, intrigued by this unusual opening. "The financial counselor you paid for has been working with us for 4 months now," Jessica continued, and she's helped us understand some things about our situation that we didn't want to face. Daniel opened his folder and pulled out what looked like a detailed budget analysis. Mom, our financial problems weren't just about student loans and unemployment. We'd been living way beyond our means for years, using credit cards to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't afford. This wasn't entirely surprising to me, given what I'd observed about their spending habits, but I appreciated their honesty. The counselor made us track every expense for 3 months, Jessica added. When we saw it all laid out on paper, we realized how irresponsible we'd been. We were spending money on things we didn't need, while telling ourselves we deserved them because of our education and professional status. I listened as they detailed their financial awakening. The expensive restaurants, the designer clothes, the luxury vacations they'd charged to credit cards, while complaining about being broke. The BMW that cost more per month than many people's rent. The country club membership they'd maintained because it was, quote, important for networking. We convinced ourselves that these things were investments in our future, Daniel said. But really, we were just trying to look successful while going deeper into debt. And when Dad died, Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I saw your house as the solution to all our problems. I didn't think about what it meant to you or how our pressure was affecting you. I just saw dollar signs. The admission hung in the air between us. I'd known this, of course, but hearing Jessica acknowledge it directly was both vindicating and sad. What's changed? I asked. Everything, Daniel replied. We've sold the BMW and bought a used Honda. We've canceled the country club membership and started cooking at home instead of eating out. Jessica's new job pays less, but we're living within our means for the first time in our marriage. And we've started paying down our debt systematically instead of just making minimum payments, Jessica added. It's going to take years, but we can see a path forward that doesn't involve anyone else bailing us out. I was impressed by their progress, but I sensed there was more to this conversation. Mom, Daniel said, we also want you to know that we understand why you changed your estate plans. We don't like it, and it's scary to think about not having that safety net, but we understand it. More than that, Jessica interjected, we respect it. The counselor helped us realize that expecting inheritance is just another form of financial irresponsibility. We should be building our security based on our own efforts, not planning our lives around your death. This was not the conversation I'd expected to have. For months, I'd been braced for continued pressure, manipulation, or legal challenges. Instead, I was hearing genuine accountability and maturity. I'm proud of you both, I said, and I meant it. It takes courage to face financial reality and make hard changes. There's something else, Daniel said. We want to ask for your help with something, but not money. I raised an eyebrow, curious about what they might need. The financial counselor suggested that we might benefit from family therapy, Jessica explained. She thinks there are communication patterns in our relationship with you that go beyond money issues. This was an unexpected development. What kind of communication patterns? Well, Daniel shifted uncomfortably. She pointed out that I've never really learned to have an adult relationship with you. I still relate to you like I'm a child who needs to be taken care of, even though I'm in my 40s. And I've been treating you like an obstacle rather than a person, Jessica added. I never bothered to get to know you as an individual. I just saw you as Daniel's mother, and eventually as someone standing between us and financial security. The honesty was refreshing, even if it was painful to hear. The counselor thinks that family therapy could help us develop healthier relationships and better communication skills, Daniel continued. But we wanted to ask if you'd be willing to participate before we scheduled anything. I considered the request carefully. Therapy had never been something our family discussed, but then again, our family had never been in this kind of crisis before. I think that's a very mature suggestion, I said finally. Yes, I'd be willing to try family therapy. Jessica looked relieved. Thank you. The counselor recommended someone who specializes in family financial dynamics and intergenerational relationships. As they were preparing to leave, Daniel turned back to me with one final thought. Mom, I want you to know that regardless of how the therapy goes or what happens with our relationship, Jessica and I support your right to make your own decisions about your money and your house. We may not always like your choices, but we respect them. After they left, I sat in Robert's study and reflected on how much our family dynamics had shifted in just 6 months. The crisis had forced everyone to examine their assumptions and motivations in ways that might never have happened otherwise. The next morning brought another unexpected phone call, this time from Christopher. "Mom," he said, "Anna and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something that might sound strange." "I'm listening. We want to know if you'd consider letting us pay rent to live in the house with you." I was so surprised that I nearly dropped the phone. "Rent? Hear me out," Christopher continued quickly. "Anna's been offered a promotion that would require us to relocate to the East Coast, but we don't want to move the twins away from their extended family. And honestly, we've been worried about you living alone in that big house." "I'm perfectly capable of living alone," I said, though not defensively. "We know you are. But we also know that house is huge, and it might be nice to have family around without giving up your independence. We'd pay market-rate rent for the upstairs bedrooms and share common spaces. You'd still be the homeowner and make all the decisions, but we'd contribute to expenses and maintenance." The idea was intriguing, though completely unexpected. "What about your own house?" "We'd sell it. The market is good right now, and the equity would help us pay down Anna's student loans. Plus, the twins adore you, and they'd love to see their grandmother every day." I found myself seriously considering the proposal. The house was large, with plenty of space for 2 families. And I had to admit that the idea of having Emma and Sophie around regularly was appealing. "Let me think about it," I said. "It's a big decision for all of us." "Of course. Take all the time you need. We just wanted you to know that it's an option." After hanging up, I walked through the house with new eyes, imagining how it might work to share the space with Christopher's family. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms and a full bathroom that could easily serve as a separate living area. The kitchen and living spaces were certainly large enough for multiple families. But more than the logistics, I was touched by the respect Christopher and Anna had shown in their approach. They weren't asking me to give them anything or expecting family discounts. They were proposing a genuine partnership that acknowledged my ownership while meeting their needs. The family therapy sessions began 2 weeks later. Dr. Sarah Hoffman was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who specialized in helping families navigate financial and inheritance issues. Her office was comfortable and neutral, decorated with plants and abstract art that somehow made difficult conversations feel less threatening. The first session was awkward, with all of us sitting stiffly on Dr. Hoffman's couches and speaking in overly polite tones. But by the 3rd session, we were having more honest conversations than we'd had in years. "Margaret," Dr. Hoffman said during one session, "you've mentioned several times that you felt invisible in your family before the Thanksgiving incident. Can you elaborate on that?" I thought about the question carefully. I suppose I felt like I'd become a supporting character in other people's stories. After Robert died, everyone was very focused on taking care of me. But no one seemed interested in who I was as an independent person. What did that look like in practical terms? Well, Daniel and Jessica would visit and immediately start discussing what I should do about various things. The house was too big, my car was too old, my social life was too limited. They had opinions about everything, but they never asked what I wanted or how I felt about their suggestions. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I thought we were being helpful." "I know you did. But it felt like you'd decided I was incompetent and needed management rather than support." Dr. Hoffman turned to Jessica. "Jessica, what was your experience of these interactions?" "Honestly," Jessica said, "I saw Margaret as someone who was stuck in the past and resistant to change. When Daniel and I would suggest things like updating the house or joining a senior center, she'd dismiss the ideas without discussion. It was frustrating. Did you consider that Margaret might have had good reasons for her preferences, or did you assume she was being stubborn?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "I assumed she was being stubborn. I didn't really consider that she might have different priorities or that her preferences were valid." These conversations continued for weeks, with Dr. Hoffman helping us identify patterns of communication that had developed over years. Daniel had never learned to relate to me as an equal adult, instead maintaining a parent-child dynamic even in his 40s. Jessica had never seen me as a complete person, instead viewing me through the narrow lens of my role as Daniel's mother. And I, Dr. Hoffman helped me realize, had sometimes enabled these patterns by not asserting my own needs and preferences clearly enough. "Margaret," she said during one session, "you mentioned that you often went along with suggestions you didn't like to avoid conflict. How do you think that affected your family relationships?" "I suppose it made it easy for them to assume I didn't have strong opinions about things," I admitted. "If I always said yes to keep the peace, they probably thought I was happy with whatever they decided." "And how did it make you feel when your family made assumptions about what you wanted?" "Frustrated. Invisible. Like my preferences didn't matter." The breakthrough came during our 6th session, when Dr. Hoffman asked each of us to describe what we wanted our family relationships to look like going forward. "I want to be seen as a capable, independent adult who happens to be in her 70s, I said. "I want my family to ask for my opinions instead of assuming they know what's best for me. And I want to be valued for who I am, not just for what I might leave behind when I die." Daniel nodded slowly. "I want to have an adult relationship with my mother, where we can disagree without it becoming a crisis. I want to be able to ask for advice or help when I need it, but I also want to support Mom when she needs it. I want to know Margaret as a person," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've spent 8 years married to her son, but I've never really tried to understand who she is or what matters to her. I want to build a real relationship instead of just going through the motions of being family." Dr. Hoffman smiled. "Those are all very achievable goals, but they'll require ongoing effort and communication from all of you." Meanwhile, my involvement with the Community Foundation was opening up a whole new chapter of my life. As a board member, I was working with fascinating people on projects that felt meaningful and impactful. I'd also begun volunteering with their financial literacy program, teaching basic investment principles to low-income families. The work was rewarding in ways I hadn't experienced since my early career in banking. I was using skills I developed over decades, but for purposes that felt more significant than maximizing shareholder value. It was through the foundation that I met Eleanor Blackwood, a retired federal judge who'd become one of my closest friends. Eleanor was 78, sharp as a tack, and had no patience for anyone who tried to treat her like a fragile elderly person. "Margaret," she said one day as we were reviewing scholarship applications, "you seem much happier than when you first joined the board. What's changed?" I considered her question while sorting through essays from high school seniors. "I think I've stopped letting other people define what my life should look like." "Ah," Eleanor nodded knowingly. "The family money drama you mentioned." I'd shared some of the basic details of my situation with Eleanor, who dealt with similar issues in her own family. "It's interesting how crises can force clarity," she continued. "When people show you who they really are, you can make decisions based on reality, instead of wishful thinking." "Do you think I was too harsh?" I asked. "Redistributing the education funds? Changing my will?" Eleanor looked at me seriously. "My dear, you were protecting yourself from people who were treating you badly. That's not harsh. That's healthy." She set down her stack of applications and leaned back in her chair. "I went through something similar with my daughter about 10 years ago. She and her husband were constantly pressuring me to sell my house and move into assisted living so they could access my equity. When I refused, they started suggesting I was becoming senile. What did you do? Quote, had my competency evaluated by 3 different specialists, updated my estate plan to exclude them entirely, and told them they could either treat me with respect or lose access to me altogether. And? It took 2 years, but they eventually realized I was serious. Now we have a much better relationship because they know I won't tolerate being mistreated." Eleanor's perspective was comforting. She'd faced similar challenges and emerged with her dignity and family relationships intact. "The key," she said, "is to set boundaries early and stick to them. People will treat you as badly as you allow them to." As summer approached, I made the decision to accept Christopher and Anna's proposal about sharing the house. We spent several weeks working out the details with an attorney, ensuring that everyone's rights and responsibilities were clearly defined. The arrangement had worked out beautifully. Christopher and Anna were respectful tenants who contributed to household expenses and helped with maintenance, but they never overstepped boundaries or tried to influence my decisions about the property. The twins brought life and energy to the house that I hadn't realized I was missing. Most importantly, the arrangement proved to Daniel and Jessica that I was perfectly capable of making independent decisions about my living situation without their input or pressure. The one-year anniversary of that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner arrived with surprisingly little fanfare. I was hosting again, but this time the dynamics were completely different. Jessica arrived early to help with preparation, but she asked what I needed instead of taking over. Daniel contributed side dishes without criticizing my menu choices. Christopher and Anna helped coordinate logistics, while allowing me to maintain control of my own kitchen. Most tellingly, when Emma asked if we could invite some of her school friends for dessert, everyone looked to me for the decision, instead of assuming they could speak for me. "Of course," I said. "The more the merrier." As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at my family and felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or inheritance. We'd all grown and changed over the past year, learning to relate to each other with honesty and respect, instead of assumptions and manipulation. During the blessing, Daniel thanked God for second chances and the wisdom to recognize our mistakes. Jessica added gratitude for the opportunity to build real relationships instead of superficial ones. When it was my turn, I simply said, "I'm thankful for a family that's learned to value each other as individuals rather than as resources." After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Jessica approached me with something that looked like nervousness. "Margaret," she said, "I have something I want to give you." She handed me a small wrapped box, and inside was a simple silver bracelet with a charm that read, "Grandma Maggie." "Emma and Sophie helped me pick it out," she said. "We wanted you to have something that represents how much you mean to us, not as an inheritance source, but as a person we love." I was touched by the gesture, especially because it represented exactly the kind of relationship I'd hoped we could build. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Daniel lingered for a private conversation. "Mom," he said, "I know you've probably made permanent decisions about your estate planning, and I want you to know that's okay. But I also want you to know that Jessica and I have established a college fund for Emma and Sophie using our own savings. We're taking responsibility for their futures instead of expecting you to provide for them." I was impressed by this development. That must require significant sacrifices given your debt situation. It does. But it feels good to know we're building their security ourselves. And honestly, we want them to learn the value of working for what they have, instead of expecting inheritance. As Daniel was leaving, he paused at the door. "Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel free to say no." "What is it?" "Next year, would you consider letting Jessica and me host Thanksgiving? Not because we want to take over or because we think you can't handle it, but because we'd like to return the favor and show you how much we've learned about hospitality and respect." The request surprised me, but in a pleasant way. "I think that sounds lovely." After everyone had gone home, I sat in Robert's chair with a cup of tea and reflected on how dramatically our family had changed. The crisis that had seemed so devastating a year ago had ultimately led to stronger relationships and better communication. But more than that, it had led to my own personal renaissance. The community foundation work, the new friendships I developed, the sense of purpose that came from using my resources to help others, all of these had given me a life that was richer and more fulfilling than anything I'd experienced since Robert's death. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, who was now settled in her new house with help from the trust fund I'd established for her. "Grandma Maggie," she said, her voice bright with happiness, "how was Thanksgiving?" "Perfect," I said, and I meant it. "How are you settling into the house?" "I love it so much. I've been thinking about Dad and Grandpa a lot lately, about how proud they'd be to see me building something of my own." "They would be proud. You've worked hard for everything you have. I learned that from you and Grandpa. You always taught us that the best things in life are the ones you earn yourself." After we hung up, I walked through my house, appreciating both its beauty and its functionality. Tomorrow, I would wake up to the sounds of my granddaughters getting ready for school. I would spend the day working on foundation projects that mattered to me. I would have dinner with family members who respected my autonomy and valued my opinions. None of this would have happened if I hadn't found the courage to stand up for myself and demand better treatment from my family. The money I'd redistributed was helping people who truly needed it, while teaching my family valuable lessons about self-reliance and respect. Jessica's declaration that I was useless had been intended to diminish me and force me into submission. Instead, it had awakened something in me that I hadn't known was dormant. It had reminded me that I was a person of value and capability, not just a convenient source of financial security for others. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt grateful for every difficult conversation, every painful realization, and every hard decision that had brought us to this point. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when it's easier to give them what they want. My wealth had indeed left Daniel and Jessica broke in the short term, forcing them to confront their financial irresponsibility and rebuild on a foundation of hard work rather than expectations. But in the long term, it had given them something much more valuable: the tools and motivation to create genuine security and authentic relationships. And it had given me back my life, my dignity, and my family's respect. Those were treasures no amount of money could buy. 5 years had passed since that life-altering Thanksgiving dinner, and as I stood in my kitchen preparing for another family gathering, I could hardly recognize the woman I'd been back then. The timid widow who had allowed herself to be bullied and manipulated was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered her own strength and purpose in ways she never could have imagined. The doorbell chimed, and I smiled as I heard the familiar chaos of my granddaughters racing to answer it. Emma and Sophie, now 13, had grown into confident young women who treated this house as their true home. Living with Christopher and Anna had been one of the best decisions I'd ever made, creating a multi-generational household that worked beautifully for everyone involved. "Grandma Maggie," Emma called from the foyer, "Aunt Sarah is here with someone." I dried my hands and went to greet my visitors, curious about who Sarah might have brought. At 30, she had become a successful nurse practitioner and was engaged to a wonderful man named Marcus who worked as a pediatric surgeon. They made a perfect couple, both dedicated to helping children and both grounded in values that would have made Robert proud. "Grandma," Sarah said, embracing me warmly, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Chen. She's the head of pediatric oncology at Children's Hospital, and she has something she wants to discuss with you." Dr. Chen was a petite woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Sarah has told me so much about your philanthropic work, and I'm hoping you might be interested in a project we're developing." We settled in the living room, and Dr. Chen explained her vision for a new family support center at the hospital. The center would provide housing, counseling, and financial assistance for families dealing with childhood cancer, allowing parents to stay close to their children during treatment without facing financial ruin. "The need is enormous," she explained, pulling out a folder of statistics and case studies. "We see families every day who have to choose between being with their sick child and maintaining their jobs. Parents who sleep in hospital waiting rooms for months because they can't afford hotel costs. Children who don't get optimal care because their families live too far away to participate in treatment decisions." As she spoke, I found myself thinking about the education funds I'd redirected years ago and how satisfying it had been to see that money help people who truly needed it. This project felt like a natural extension of that same impulse. "What kind of support are you looking for?" I asked. "We need an anchor donor to get the project started," Dr. Chen replied. "Someone willing to make a substantial commitment that will encourage other donors to contribute. We estimate the initial cost at about $3 million, with ongoing operational expenses of roughly $500,000 annually." The numbers didn't faze me. Over the past 5 years, my investment portfolio had continued to grow, and my living expenses had remained modest despite my charitable giving. I had the resources to fund this project entirely on my own if necessary. "Tell me more about how the center would operate," I said. For the next hour, Dr. Chen outlined the detailed plans her team had developed. The center would include temporary housing for up to 20 families, counseling services, educational support for siblings, and emergency financial assistance for families facing unexpected medical expenses. They'd partnered with social workers, child psychologists, and family therapists to create a comprehensive support system. "Dr. Chen," I said when she finished her presentation, "I'm very interested in supporting this project, but I have some conditions." Her face lit up with hope. Of course. What did you have in mind? First, I want the center to be named the Robert Whitmore Family Support Center, in honor of my late husband. Second, I want to be involved in the planning and oversight, not just as a donor but as a board member. And third, I want to ensure that families never have to provide financial information or prove their need. If a child is receiving treatment at your hospital, their family should have access to support, period. Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. Those conditions are more than acceptable. In fact, they align perfectly with our values and goals. We shook hands on the basic agreement, and I felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came from using my resources for something meaningful. After Dr. Chen left, Sarah lingered for a private conversation. "Grandma," she said, "I have to ask you something, and I hope it doesn't sound presumptuous." "Go ahead, sweetheart. Are you sure you want to commit to such a large project? I know you've been very generous with your charitable giving, and I don't want you to feel pressured into anything." I appreciated her concern, but it made me realize how much my family's perspective on my financial capabilities had evolved. They no longer saw me as a helpless widow who needed protection from my own decisions. "Sarah, I'm very sure, and I want you to know that this donation won't affect your trust fund or anyone else's inheritance. I have more than enough resources to support causes I care about while still providing for my family." "That's not what I'm worried about," she said quickly. "I just want to make sure you're not giving away money you might need for your own care as you get older." This was exactly the kind of thoughtful concern I appreciated, as opposed to the manipulative pressure I'd faced years earlier. Sarah was looking out for my well-being, not trying to protect her own financial interests. "I've done extensive planning with my financial advisor," I assured her. "Even after this donation, I'll have enough resources to cover any care needs I might have, plus substantial assets to leave to family and other charitable causes." The Family Support Center project consumed much of my energy over the following months. I worked closely with Dr. Chen and her team to refine the plans, interview potential staff members, and coordinate with hospital administration. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways that reminded me why I'd loved my career in banking so many years ago. It was during one of our planning meetings that I received an unexpected phone call from Jessica. Her voice was excited in a way I hadn't heard since the early days of her relationship with Daniel. "Margaret," she said, "I have the most wonderful news. Daniel and I are pregnant." I felt a surge of genuine happiness for them. After 5 years of rebuilding their financial stability and working on their relationship, they'd finally felt ready to start a family. "Jessica, that's wonderful news. How are you feeling?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure," she laughed. "We've been trying for over a year, and we'd started to worry it might not happen. But here we are, 12 weeks along, and everything looks healthy." We talked for another 20 minutes about her pregnancy, their plans for preparing the nursery, and how Daniel was handling the prospect of becoming a father. The conversation was warm and natural, nothing like the stilted interactions we'd had during the worst of our family crisis. "Margaret," Jessica said before we hung up, "there's something else I want to talk to you about. Could Daniel and I come over this weekend? There's something we want to ask you, and we'd prefer to do it in person." I agreed to the visit, curious about what they might want to discuss. Given our history, I felt a small flutter of anxiety, but I reminded myself that our relationship had evolved considerably over the years. Saturday afternoon found Daniel and Jessica sitting in my living room, both looking nervous but determined. Daniel was holding a folder of papers, which triggered unfortunate memories of previous financial discussions. "Mom," Daniel began, "we want to talk to you about the baby and our plans for the future." "I'm listening," I said carefully. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about what kind of parents we want to be and what kind of life we want to provide for our child," Jessica continued. "And we've realized that some of our old attitudes about money and success were pretty messed up." Daniel nodded. "We spent years living beyond our means and then expecting other people to bail us out when we got into trouble. We don't want to raise a child who has those same entitlement issues." This was promising, but I waited to hear where the conversation was heading. "So we've made some decisions," Jessica said. "We want to raise this baby without relying on family money. We want them to understand the value of work and self-reliance." "That sounds very reasonable," I said. Daniel opened his folder and pulled out what looked like a legal document. "Mom, We want to formally waive any claim to inheritance from your estate, both for ourselves and for our child." I was speechless for a moment. This was the last thing I'd expected them to say. "We know you've already changed your will to redirect most of your assets to charity," Daniel continued, "but we want to make it official that we're not expecting anything, and we don't want our child to grow up expecting anything either." Jessica leaned forward earnestly. "We've seen how inheritance expectations can damage family relationships. We nearly destroyed our relationship with you because we were so focused on money instead of treating you like a person we loved. We don't want our child to ever make those mistakes." I looked at the document they'd prepared, which was a formal renunciation of any claims to my estate. It was thorough and legally binding, clearly drafted by competent attorneys. "This is very thoughtful," I said slowly, "but are you sure you want to make such a permanent decision? Your financial situation could change, and you might need help in the future." "We're sure," Daniel said firmly. "Jessica and I have built a solid financial foundation based on our own work. We have savings, reasonable debt levels, and good insurance. We want to raise our child to be self-sufficient and grateful for what they earn, not resentful about what they're owed." Jessica smiled. "Besides, we've learned that the most valuable thing you can give someone is respect and love, not money. We want our child to have a relationship with their grandmother that's based on affection, not financial expectations." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This conversation represented everything I'd hoped would come from the difficult years we'd all endured. "I'm proud of both of you," I said. "And I'm honored that you want to protect our relationship from financial complications." We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing their plans for parenthood and their hopes for the future. For the first time since I'd known Jessica, I felt like I was seeing the person she really was underneath the ambition and financial anxiety that had defined her personality for so many years. As they were leaving, Jessica turned back to me with one final thought. "Margaret, I hope you know how much I regret the way I treated you during those early years. I was so focused on what I thought you should do that I never took the time to appreciate who you are. You're an amazing woman, and I'm grateful to have you as my mother-in-law." The months that followed brought exciting developments on multiple fronts. The Robert Whitmore Family Support Center broke ground in the spring, with a completion date scheduled for the following year. I was deeply involved in every aspect of the project, from selecting furniture for the family apartments to interviewing potential staff members. Meanwhile, Daniel and Jessica's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and I found myself looking forward to becoming a grandmother again. Emma and Sophie were excited about having a baby cousin, and Christopher and Anna were pleased to see their family relationships continuing to heal and strengthen. It was during this period that I received another unexpected visitor. I was working in Robert's study when Anna knocked on the door to let me know that a woman was at the front door asking to speak with me. "She says her name is Victoria Pemberton," Anna said. "She mentioned something about your charitable work." The name wasn't familiar, but I went to the door to meet my visitor. Victoria Pemberton was an elegantly dressed woman who appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "thank you for seeing me. I'm Victoria Pemberton, and I represent a group of philanthropists who have been following your charitable activities with great interest." I invited her in, curious about what this might be about. "Mrs. Whitmore," Victoria continued once we were settled, "I'm here to invite you to join an organization called the Legacy Circle. We're a group of individuals who have made substantial commitments to charitable giving and who work together to identify and support high-impact projects." She explained that the Legacy Circle was composed of about 50 philanthropists from across the country, each of whom had pledged to give away at least half of their wealth during their lifetimes. They met quarterly to share ideas, collaborate on major projects, and provide mutual support for their charitable endeavors. "How did you learn about my charitable work?" I asked. "Your support for the Children's Hospital Family Center caught our attention," Victoria replied. "But when we researched your background, we discovered a pattern of thoughtful, strategic giving that aligns perfectly with our values." She pulled out a portfolio of the Legacy Circle's recent projects, a scholarship program that had sent over 300 first-generation college students to university, a microfinance initiative that had helped thousands of women start small businesses in developing countries, and a medical research program that had contributed to breakthrough treatments for rare diseases. The power of the legacy circle comes from collaboration, Victoria explained. Instead of 50 individual donors, each supporting separate projects, we pool our resources and expertise to tackle larger challenges that no one person could address alone. The concept was appealing, and I found myself genuinely interested in learning more. What would membership involve? I asked. We meet quarterly, either in person or virtually, to review potential projects and make funding decisions. Members are expected to contribute both financially and intellectually, sharing their expertise and helping to evaluate opportunities. There are no minimum contribution requirements beyond the initial pledge to give away half of your wealth, but most members contribute between $1 and $5 million per year to collaborative projects. I spent the next week researching the Legacy Circle and speaking with several current members. Everyone I talked to was enthusiastic about the organization and spoke passionately about the impact they'd been able to achieve through collaboration. After careful consideration, I decided to join. The pledge to give away half of my wealth was significant, but it aligned with my own values and my desire to use my resources for maximum impact. I also appreciated the intellectual stimulation of working with other philanthropists on complex projects. My first Legacy Circle meeting was held at a retreat center in Colorado, and I was impressed by the caliber of people I met. The group included retired executives, successful entrepreneurs, and inherited wealth holders who had chosen to dedicate their resources to charitable causes. They were serious about their philanthropic work, but also warm and welcoming to new members. During the 3-day retreat, we reviewed potential projects ranging from educational initiatives in underserved communities to environmental conservation programs. I found myself drawn to a proposal for supporting aging adults who wanted to remain in their homes but needed additional resources and services. This hits close to home for me, I told the group during our discussion. I've experienced firsthand how family dynamics can become complicated when adult children assume their aging parents can't make good decisions for themselves. The project leader, a retired social worker named David Martinez, was excited by my interest. We're looking at creating a model that provides practical support while preserving individual autonomy and dignity. Would you be interested in serving on the planning committee? I agreed immediately, recognizing that this project could help address issues I'd faced personally while also supporting thousands of other families dealing with similar challenges. As autumn approached, I found myself busier and more engaged than I'd been at any point since Robert's death. The Family Support Center was nearing completion, the Legacy Circle Aging in Place project was in the research phase, and I was serving on the Community Foundation Board while maintaining my involvement in their financial literacy program. Most importantly, my family relationships had evolved into something I treasured. Daniel and Jessica's baby was due in December, and we were all eagerly anticipating the newest addition to the family. Christopher and Anna had settled into a comfortable routine as my housemates, and Emma and Sophie continued to bring joy and energy to our shared home. The only shadow on my contentment was the realization that I was 77 years old and needed to think seriously about my own aging process. While I was healthy and active, I couldn't ignore the fact that my needs might change in the coming years. It was Eleanor Blackwood who forced me to confront this reality during one of our regular coffee dates. "Margaret," she said bluntly, "have you given any thought to what you'll do if you need care assistance? I know Christopher and Anna are wonderful, but you can't expect them to become your caregivers." Eleanor, now 83, had recently made the decision to move into a high-end retirement community after a fall that had left her temporarily unable to live independently. "I've been avoiding that conversation," I admitted. "I suppose I'm hoping I'll remain healthy until I die peacefully in my sleep." "That's wishful thinking, not planning," Eleanor replied with characteristic directness. "You need to make decisions about your future care while you're still completely competent to do so." She was right, of course. I'd spent years advocating for my own autonomy and independence, but true autonomy meant taking responsibility for planning my own future rather than leaving others to make decisions for me. Over the following weeks, I researched care options and had honest conversations with my family about my preferences and concerns. Christopher and Anna assured me that they were happy to provide whatever support I needed, but I was determined not to burden them with caregiving responsibilities they hadn't chosen. After extensive research, I decided to pursue a somewhat unconventional approach. Instead of planning to move to a retirement community, I chose to retrofit my house to accommodate aging in place while hiring professional caregivers as needed. This would allow me to remain in my beloved home while ensuring that Christopher and Anna could continue to be family members rather than caregivers. The house modifications were extensive but thoughtful. We installed an elevator to the second floor, updated bathrooms with accessibility features, and created a potential caregiver suite in what had been Robert's workshop. The changes preserved the character of the house while making it more functional for someone with mobility or health challenges. December arrived with all the excitement that comes with anticipating a new baby. Jessica had been having contractions for several hours when Daniel called to let me know they were heading to the hospital. "Do you want us to pick you up?" he asked. Jessica specifically requested that you be there. I was touched by the invitation, remembering how different things had been during the early years of their marriage when I'd felt like an unwelcome intruder in their major life events. The labor lasted 12 hours, and I spent most of that time in the waiting room with Christopher, Anna, and the twins. When Daniel finally emerged to announce the birth of Robert Daniel Whitmore, named for his grandfather, we all erupted in cheers. "Jessica wants to see you," Daniel told me, his eyes bright with tears of joy. "She says she can't wait to introduce you to your grandson." Holding baby Robert for the first time was one of the most profound experiences of my life. He was perfect and tiny and completely innocent of all the family drama that had preceded his arrival. Looking at him, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us all to this moment. "He's beautiful," I whispered to Jessica, who was glowing despite her exhaustion. "Margaret," she said softly, "Daniel and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something important." I looked up from the baby, curious about what she wanted to discuss. "We know you've legally bound us to refuse any inheritance, and we're happy about that decision," she continued. "But we want Robert to have a relationship with you that's based on love and shared experiences, not money." "Of course," I said. "That's what I want too. So we're hoping you'll consider being very involved in his life, not as a financial provider, but as his grandmother. We want him to learn from you, spend time with you, and develop the kind of close relationship that will enrich both of your lives." I felt tears streaming down my face as I looked at this precious baby and thought about all the love and wisdom I hope to share with him. "There's nothing I'd love more," I said. As winter gave way to spring, I found myself settling into the rhythm of life with a new grandchild. Baby Robert was a frequent visitor to the house, and I loved watching Emma and Sophie embrace their roles as big cousins. The house that had once felt too empty was now filled with the sounds of multiple generations enjoying each other's company. The Robert Whitmore Family Support Center officially opened in May, and the dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds of hospital staff, patient families, and community supporters. Standing at the podium to speak about Robert's legacy and the importance of supporting families in crisis, I felt his presence with me in a way that was both comforting and inspiring. My husband Robert believed that the measure of a life well lived was not what you accumulated for yourself, but what you contributed to others. I told the gathered crowd, "This center represents his values and his commitment to helping families stay together during their most difficult times." After the ceremony, Dr. Chen pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Margaret," she said, "I want you to know that 3 families moved into the center this week. Because of your generosity, children with cancer will have their parents close by during treatment, and those parents won't have to choose between being with their sick child and maintaining their financial stability." The impact was immediate and tangible in ways that made every dollar spent feel worthwhile. As summer arrived, I received news that the Legacy Circle's Aging in Place project had received approval for a pilot program in 5 cities. My involvement in the planning had been extensive, and I was thrilled to see the concept moving toward implementation. "Margaret," David Martinez told me during a conference call, "your insights into family dynamics and autonomy issues have been invaluable. Would you consider serving as the project's family advocacy coordinator?" The position would involve consulting with families participating in the pilot program, helping them navigate the challenges of arranging support services while maintaining independence and dignity. It was exactly the kind of work I was passionate about, drawing on my own experiences while helping others avoid the pitfalls my family had encountered. "I'd be honored," I replied. As autumn approached, marking the 6th anniversary of that transformative Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself reflecting on the dramatic changes that had reshaped my life. The frightened, grieving widow who had allowed herself to be bullied and manipulated was gone, replaced by a confident woman who had discovered her own strength and purpose. My relationship with Daniel and Jessica had evolved into something genuine and loving, built on mutual respect rather than financial expectations. Baby Robert was thriving, and his parents were raising him with values that emphasized gratitude and self-reliance rather than entitlement. Christopher and Anna continued to be wonderful housemates, and Emma and Sophie were growing into remarkable young women who treated me as a beloved grandmother rather than a convenient source of funding. Most importantly, I had discovered that the second half of my life could be just as meaningful and fulfilling as the first. The philanthropic work that had started as a response to family crisis had evolved into a true calling that gave my days purpose and my resources impact. Standing in my kitchen that October morning, preparing for another family Thanksgiving dinner, I thought about Jessica's cruel words from 6 years earlier. She'd called me useless, intending to diminish me and force me into submission. Instead, she'd awakened something in me that had been dormant since Robert's death. The knowledge that I was a person of value and capability, not just a convenient source of financial security for others. My wealth had indeed left them broke temporarily, forcing them to confront their financial irresponsibility and rebuild on a foundation of hard work rather than expectations. But in the long term, it had given them something much more valuable: the tools and motivation to create genuine security and authentic relationships. The doorbell rang, and I heard the familiar chaos of my family arriving for dinner. Baby Robert's happy babbling mixed with Emma and Sophie's excited chatter, while Daniel and Jessica's voices carried the warmth of people who were genuinely happy to be together. As I opened the door to welcome my family, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for every difficult conversation, every painful realization, and every hard decision that had brought us to this point. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when it's easier to give them what they want. The woman who had once been dismissed as useless had discovered that she was anything but. I had built a legacy that extended far beyond family wealth, creating impact that would outlast my lifetime and relationships that were based on love rather than financial interest. And as my family gathered around the table that had witnessed both our worst conflicts and our greatest reconciliations, I knew that Robert would be proud of the woman I'd become and the family we'd all worked to rebuild together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.